next 10 minutes I'll just be playing some background music, and those are just small piano pieces by Chinese American composer Tan Dun, who is currently teaching at Varda College, and he's also, as you'll see later, he is one of the featured composers in the documentary Beethoven in Beijing, and there are a lot of interviews with him. folklore of Xiangxi, and just a little interesting story. Xiangxi is this like tiny region in southern China where my dad spent his childhood, and that was also the first place I discovered Tendun's music. He actually scored one of the big shows there that my dad took me to, and it was then and there my dad was like, "You should write music like he does." And it was kind of a coincidence that now we're watching this documentary about him and many other Chinese musicians who had come to the States to make a career for themselves.
have you all here for this showing of Beethoven in Beijing. I hope you enjoyed the music. As Kashan said, it all played a significant role in the theme of the event today.
The first piece was the second movement from Beethoven's Eighth Violin Sonata, and then we got to hear some of Tanjun's music, and then finally one of Dashian's own compositions. My fellow musicians here are both Jacobs School of Music students, and they both have performances coming up. Addison has a senior recital next month with his own compositions, and then one of Dashian's quartets will be premiered in April. So those are on that QR code and in the slideshow if you want to put those in your calendar. The music from today, if you're interested in learning more, it will be being recorded by the Community Access Television Services through the library. If you want to learn more, it should be available about a week. And then we have Martin here doing photographs. So if you want any photos from today, his business card's out there. We will be going straight through the program today, so feel free to come and go as needed. If you didn't already, feel free to put your name in for the door prize drawing for a signed copy of Beethoven in Beijing. And then we'll do a photo with Jennifer on the stage with the door prize winner. So again, we hope you are able to stay through that. I think that's everything, so we will get the film started. I'll do the lights. Yep, we'll do lights, curtains, and actions. Literally.
Director herself. So I'm going to say we have about 30 minutes with Jennifer. I'm going to save most of that for audience question, but I do want to start a discussion with just one question for Jennifer and one for our organizer, Karina. So Jennifer, I have a question for you first.
Sure.
Let's talk a little bit about kind of the historical background of this documentary, as well as just the historical background of Western classical music in China. It wasn't until watching this movie that I realized that I had been taking granted of how much of Western classical influence I had growing up in China as a concert classical pianist and now composer. So while you were doing research for this film as well as collecting all those footages, what surprised you the most about the historical background of Western classical music in China?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for showing the film and your interest in the film. And thanks to everyone who came out on what I'm sure is a cold day in Bloomington, because it's freezing here in Philadelphia. And I have to apologize ahead of time. I'm getting over the flu, so I cough a lot. But maybe it would help just to give a little background on why I decided to do the film, as well as what surprised me along the way. But I used to be a reporter for the Philadelphia Inquirer, and I was based in Beijing in the 1990s, writing about China. In 2008, the newspaper, the Philadelphia Inquirer, asked me to cover a tour of China by the Philadelphia Orchestra, and it was to commemorate the 35th anniversary of this historic 1973 tour. So I went, and I was very familiar with China. I mean, I had lived there, I had written about it since, for decades, really. And I was really surprised when I traveled with the orchestra to see kind of the response of Chinese audiences to the Philadelphia Orchestra. There was a real sense of nostalgia for this orchestra. And I was also quite impressed by the way that the audience for classical music had grown so much. I have a cousin who is a classical musician, a pianist, and she went to the Shanghai Conservatory during the Cultural Revolution years, so I was kind of familiar with how things had been kind of closed for so long. But in 2008, there was a real interest in classical music, that had been kind of revived. And so I really felt like this was a chapter of U.S. history that not many people knew, but that was very important. And I also thought there was kind of a broader story to tell. As I kind of dug more into the classical music scene, the thing that surprised me the most is just how it was growing so much. Here in the United States, a lot of orchestras are struggling financially and for audience. If you go, the Philadelphia Orchestra is one of the best in the country, and we have a phenomenal conductor, Yannick Nézet-Séguin. But even with his dynamism and the excellence of the orchestra, it's hard to fill, you know, the concert hall. The audience is very old. When I was filming this, I went on tour with the orchestra 3 times. And what really surprised me is going into concert halls in Shanghai and Beijing and seeing how there was a very young audience compared to American audiences. I saw a lot of families, I saw a lot of couples. So in a way, you know, the big surprise I think in doing this film was there is a bright spot in the world of classical music, and it's in China. So
that is awesome. And yeah, I guess at this point I have to thank Philadelphia Orchestra and musicians like them for the kind of education and exposure that I have been given when I was a kid growing up in China in the 2000s. And I have a question for Karina, our event organizer as well. Karina reached out to both Jennifer and me about this event, and she really just wanted to share this film with all of you here today. So I wanted to know, what was your first reaction watching the film? What were some of the most memorable parts? And tell us a little bit about your journey and how this film had kind of inspired you to actually go to China this year.
My initial reaction to the film is I was just so amazed. I was fortunate to have had music lessons in school. Fortunately, they still had elementary music, and I got to take lessons through high school and college. So we are, as you said in the film, seeing less and less of that. And it's hard to watch from this end, knowing I was able to take those classes, but the students now might not be able to. So I loved seeing that in the film, that there's still so many great music opportunities for performers and for people who want to watch events, and seeing how you mentioned how music does connect us and we can enjoy it anywhere in the world now. When I became aware of this film, I was remembering this, thinking about what I'd say today, and I remember I had just left my third shift job. This was a time in my life I was working 3 jobs. I worked 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. at a factory. I was leaving there, heading to my house to shower, change, to go to my day job, 30 to 5. And I was trying to learn more about China at this time. I wanted to do everything I could to get a better understanding and impression of the country and culture on this side of the ocean as I could before I went. So I had your interview with University of Southern California queued up. I remember driving home listening to that, and I instantly, I just needed to see this documentary. As a musician and an amateur musician, the title caught my attention. And then as an international adoptee from China, getting an understanding of the music scene in China just gave me so much, made me feel so much better connected to my home country. It answered questions I didn't know I had. It made me feel like I had things back from my past that I didn't know was missing. So again, just so grateful to Jennifer and Dashon for helping me bring all this together and finally see this documentary. And then hopefully I will be in China in April for my 30th birthday. I've applied for a visa and I'm waiting to hear back now.
Well, congratulations, happy birthday. When you're there, you're going to have to go to a concert. Or in Shanghai. The Beijing Concert Hall is just spectacular. They call it the Big Egg, and you saw it in the film, but you definitely have to go.
Yes.
Yeah, in the film, I remember Yannick said Beethoven would be very surprised if he
Yeah.
that the Canadian conductor and the Chinese singers were performing his work. I think he would be really glad to know that his music is inspiring someone adopted from China to go back to her birthplace and feel the sense of connection because of classical music. That's really neat. Okay, so I want to give most of the rest of the time to you all and see if you have any questions after watching Beethoven in Beijing. And we don't have a mic here, so I would just like to ask you to speak loudly, and we will also repeat the question to Jennifer and everyone else here. Martin?
What was your biggest challenge filming in China?
Well, filming in China is difficult. You don't have the same freedom of movement that you do here in the US. So, for instance, we were staying in Beijing at the Hyatt Hotel, which is just off Tiananmen Square near the Forbidden City. And we wanted to go out on the sidewalk just to interview people about classical music and whether they knew the Philadelphia Orchestra, but of course you're not allowed to do that in China. You need permission, and like we were filming in a park and we were told to leave and not film. So it's just quite a different atmosphere for a journalist or a filmmaker in China versus the US. The other thing that was challenging is distilling the story. We knew that we wanted to tell the history, so the first third of the movie is about what happened in 1973. But we wanted to use that as a starting point and really convey kind of this revival of interest in classical music over the last 40, 50 years. China had a classical music tradition. There were two very good conservatories, in the 30s, the 40s. When 1949, with the creation of the People's Republic of China, the conservatories were still operating. But what happened to China, what disrupted the kind of appreciation of classical music was the Cultural Revolution. So there was this 10-year period where, as the movie explains, that classical Western music was not permitted. So, it was just it was something I wanted to convey, kind of the evolution, the revival of the classical music scene. And so as a storyteller, that was really challenging. You want to tell a big story, but you also don't want to overwhelm your audience. So I hope I didn't overwhelm you, and I hope I was able to convey it. But, and the other thing that we wanted to convey is kind of the contrast to the United States. For instance, China has invested a lot in music education over the decades, and unfortunately, in a lot of school districts in America, music programs are being cut or reduced. So there is this kind of tension that is somewhat ironic, that someone like Long Long had to help a school in Philadelphia to maintain their music program. So it's kind of ironic. And so we had a lot that we wanted to do with the film, so it was ambitious that way. And so that, as a director, that was a huge challenge.
Any other questions, Mel?
Well, I just want to say thank you so much, Jennifer, for this beautiful film. It is, I really appreciated the historical context, especially moving from the 1973 connection and interaction then, and then over time, the beauty of it is that it evolved, that relationship turning to, up to now, it still continues with with this sort of like soft diplomacy.
Yes.
I thought that should, I'm actually curious, I guess my question is, where is that relationship at the moment, given the political climate and foreign policy status that we have with China?
Yeah, well, thank you for your question and for your interest in the film. But it is, again, one of the reasons I wanted to tell this story is I feel like it's an example of cultural diplomacy and why it really matters to have exchanges like this. And unfortunately, I don't know what's going to happen moving forward. I can tell you with the Philadelphia Orchestra that they have maintained ties with Chinese organizations, orchestras, and audiences. They went to China last year. I don't know if there are plans to go next year or this year. I do think, unfortunately, the political environment is such that it might be difficult for orchestras to continue the way they had been. For instance, the Shanghai Philharmonic has been to Philadelphia to perform, and there were a lot of exchanges, prior to the whole pandemic. So I'm not sure what's going to happen moving. Again, at least with the Philadelphia Orchestra, that they remain committed. But other orchestras that have been traveling to China, both American and Chinese, it's a little unclear where things are heading. And, unfortunately, you can't ignore the political environment and how it's deteriorated so much. So hopefully we can continue exchanges like this, because I think it really helps to kind of temper the political noise.
Yeah.
So I think it's very important.
Thank you.
I have a quick question. So again, I'm going to echo everyone else's sentiments. Thank you so much for making this film. This was a really interesting piece to watch. So in the film, it was mentioned that obviously during the Cultural Revolution, access to Western music and the attitude towards Western music was, very much not allowed. And then afterwards, it kind of saw this resurgence in interest from all these musicians, who hadn't been able to access that during that time period. I'm kind of wondering from like a music education standpoint, because again, something else that was mentioned was that in China, it's very normal for kids from a very young age to start in classical music lessons, just like we would in sports over here. In your experience in making this film, did you find, and from your own research as a journalist, do you find that the sort of popular attitude or opinion in China with Western music versus traditional Chinese music, is there one preferred over the other when it comes to exposing kids to classical music from an early age?
Yeah, I can't answer that question precisely, whether there's more or less interest in traditional Chinese music, but it is so interesting what has happened in China over the last 50 years, because I attribute it to three factors. With the Cultural Revolution, this interest in classical music was repressed. And it was, people were not allowed to study it, play it, listen to it. And so when the Cultural Revolution ended, it was like there was a lot of pent-up demand and interest in this particular art form. The other thing that happened in China is, again, as you pointed out, there was an investment in music education. I think it was Jiang Zemin, when he was president, that he implemented, music education as a priority. And then for, whether or not it's the traditional versus Western style music, whether one is more popular than the other, there's no denying the Lang Lang effect. Lang Lang achieves superstardom And I think as a result of that, the other trend that we've had in China over the last 40 years is the economic, revival of China and the emergence of a middle class. And so every parent wants their child to succeed. And in China, many parents equate that with one way of succeeding with music and mastering the violin and the piano and wanting your child to be the next Long. Just a side note, I mentioned this in the film, but in Philadelphia, we have the Curtis Institute. And the man who was the professor for Long, Gary Graffman, was also the professor for Yu Jia Wang and Zhang Hao Chen. And I mean, between the three of them, they're like, superstars around the world as pianists. So I think the success of people like Yu Jia Wang and Long has maybe inspired Chinese parents. I don't know. I'm assuming. So maybe there's some in the audience who can add some insight into that.
I'll actually just add a little bit to that. Growing up,
I can't hear.
no.
Yeah.
I'll add just a little bit to that. It was a really good question, and from my own experience, I actually also came from Hunan province where Tendun grew up. And growing up, there was a sense that traditional Chinese music was always ever present in the family. My grandparents were traditional opera singers, and they played erhu, guzheng, and I got to just do that as a part of family tradition. But Western music was something very valued, and I had to spend extra time to learn and comprehend because it wasn't naturally from my homeland. So there was this sentiment of, that it's something foreign, but there's so much access to it, you still have a chance to master it. Any other questions as far as?
Hi. First of all, I'd say thank you very much for this film. I really enjoyed it. I learned about the Cultural Revolution from time during classes last semester, so I really see how it resonates here. So my question is, in your opinion, what do you think is the trajectory of music education in China? Do you think that classical music or Western music in general would be to the detriment of local music themselves?
That's a hard question for me to answer. First of all, I finished reporting this movie in 2019, so a lot has happened. I'm just being honest with you. I don't know kind of what's happening in China with music education. Daishuan, maybe you can add to that?
Yeah, and just a little clarification. I came to the States as an exchange student in 2014, so I grew up in the 2000s. Not really clear of what is happening nowadays, but when I was growing up, it was very much a part of daily life. But again, I have not been back, unfortunately, for the past 10 years, so I can't speak to the present time.
I don't have a question or comment just a comment. I saw my former bosses there. You interviewed Jennifer, Ambassador Nicholas Platt. And Sheila. So they served as ambassador to the Philippines in 1987, 88, to 1989, yeah. So I'm like, whoa, what's he doing there? So I didn't realize that he was, he played a role.
He
when
did.
He was a young diplomat during the it's amazing.
Nick and his wife are just Sheila. Sheila passed away.
I'm sorry to hear that.
But they were just wonderful. And actually, Nick has a book. I'm looking at my my bookshelf to see where it is. Nick wrote a book about his China years. So in it, there's a chapter about the visit of the Philadelphia Orchestra, because he was on the ground, an officer in what was then just the U.S. office in China. We didn't have an embassy at the time. And so his job was basically to hold the hand of Eugene Ormandy and to take him around China and to make sure nothing went awry. Sheila, his wife, is a pistol. I mean, she's so funny, and she, her job was to also entertain the Ormandys. But Sheila wrote a diary of when she was in China, and so I ended up writing a book about the whole 1973 tour. It's also called Beethoven in Beijing. It was my COVID project because we finished the film in 2020, and our premiere we were going to have it at the Academy of Music in Philadelphia. It was going to be this big to-do, and of course, no one was getting together in theater, so it had to be virtual. But anyway, during this time of seclusion, I decided to take all my research that I had done and to write an oral history of the tour, really including a lot of the memories and the voices of the people who were on the tour. But I go back to Sheila because she had written this diary of her time with the Philadelphia Orchestra, and I was able, Nick Platt shared that with me, so I was able to use some of her wry, funny observations in the oral history. But Nick Platt is just wonderful. He has gone back many times with the Philadelphia Orchestra, and it's really helped them to maintain and cultivate this relationship with Chinese audiences. So Nick Platt played a very important role. Were you working as a diplomat in the Philippines?
No, I was an FSN, the Filipino Staff National at the U.S. There was a U.S. Information Agency, U.S. Information Service that actually handles the cultural affairs of the U.S. State Department. So the USIA reports to the U.S. Embassy, and Nick Platt was the ambassador at that time.
Yeah.
And he visited our little town in Mindanao, and I had to help gather everyone for the ambassador.
Yeah, cultural diplomacy is very important, and in 2023, I was able to travel to China to show the film at the U.S. Embassy in Beijing and at the consulates in Shanghai and Guangzhou. And so the embassy and the consulates would invite Chinese people to come watch the film. And so it was, it was very nice, and it was very good to kind of share it with the Chinese audience, because it's very different than when you share it with an American audience. I also did a screening in Hong Kong, 2 screenings actually in Hong Kong, but unfortunately, the film cannot be shown on Chinese TV because I talk about the Cultural Revolution, and because the film includes images of Mao's wife, Jiang Qing. And, I was told that if I took out those scenes, they would be able to get it past censors, but I wasn't willing to do that. I mean, that to me is an important part of the story. And, the other ironic thing is my film is actually a positive film about the U.S. and China. So it's unfortunate that it can't be shown for that reason. So, Mei Ban Fa.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
I actually have a question based on something you just said, but also thank you so much. This film was very interesting and very educational, because I don't know much about the history of the film Philadelphia Harmonic with going to China. So you just mentioned that this film was screened in China when you were back in 2023 and several times in Hong Kong, and that the reaction was different. So I was curious kind of what is the typical reaction or how it's perceived by audiences in Hong Kong and of course mainland China versus Western or American audiences?
Yeah, I mean, the reaction was great in Hong Kong and in the Chinese cities that I appeared. The reason I say it was different is Americans don't have a very deep understanding of world history. And, you have to take them by the hand, American audiences, and explain what was the Cultural Revolution. Even my editor, who's a young woman, she thought it was a positive thing because it was about culture, and it's like, no. So in terms of the different responses, in Chinese audiences, they got it. They didn't need the explanation. And I think people were kind of, I think they appreciated that we weren't just focusing on China, but the kind of the two-way street where the Shanghai Philharmonic came to Philadelphia to perform the work of a Chinese composer. So I think people were perhaps surprised, but pleasantly surprised by things like that.
We probably have time for one more question. Who would like to take this?
Am I able to be heard back here or no? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes? Okay. Thank you for a splendiferous and inspirational film. Absolutely spectacular. It has been, I think, discovered recently that listening to Beethoven's music actually strengthens connections in the auditory cortex and stimulates neuroplasticity. But I want to get right to my question. From the lens of a person with experience of a reporter, were there comments, video clips, or interviews that you were unable to include? You mentioned censorship of the Cultural Revolution footage due to film confiscation, time constraints, editing concerns, or even budgeting issues. Again, thank you very much.
Yeah, the budgeting issue is a very it's a very severe issue. It's very expensive to make a film like this, and it cost, our budget was $1 million. Wow. We were very fortunate to get a grant from the government, the National Endowment for Humanities, a wonderful program that has been totally gutted by the current administration. But there weren't, the things that we didn't include in the film and took out were just editorial decisions, mostly, because we were trying to streamline the story and not go off into too many tangents. But in terms of the impact of Beethoven on listeners, I'll tell you, one of the highlights of this whole project was being in Beijing, inside the Big 8 concert hall, hearing the Philadelphia Orchestra with the Chinese choir singing Beethoven's Ninth. I mean, I get chills just thinking about it. And in the editing process, you sit with your editor and you have to go over and over and over scenes, to get it right. But to be able to listen to that so much was just joyful. Yeah. And, there was one moment at the end of Beethoven's Ninth where the old couple who we had been following, they were in the audience. And I could see them standing ovation and applauding, and afterwards the husband told me, he said he had tears in his eyes. He's never heard anything so beautiful. So, it was just a real kind of existential moment to be hearing Beethoven in that environment. So I hope the film could convey a little bit of that, but for me, actually being in that concert hall and hearing the music and feeling it, boy, that was special.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer, so much for being here, and it's a real special treat to be able to talk to you immediately after watching the film.
Yeah.
If you could stay on just for one more minute, we're going to pick one lucky winner today to take home a signed version of Jennifer's book, Beethoven in Beijing, and her review will select the winner.
Casey Hawk.